Rain streaked down the restaurant windows as Haley Carter hurried through the revolving door, shaking off droplets that clung to her black dress. The warmth hit her first, followed by the low murmur of conversation and clinking glassware. She had spent 12 straight hours in the ER saving lives, dodging heartbreak, and now she was here keeping a promise. She regretted the moment she made it. Her best friend's message still glowed on her phone. One drink. "You need a life, Haley." She sighed and slipped the phone into her purse. The host looked up, smiling politely. "Table for two. He's already here?" "Of course he was." She followed the man through a maze of white tablecloths and soft jazz until she saw him alone near the window, the city light scattering across his dark hair like fragments of silver. He looked up, and time seemed to tilt. His eyes were gray cool and focused, the kind that noticed everything without revealing anything. "Haley Carter?" he asked. His voice was low, almost cautious. She nodded, brushing rain from her hair. "Sorry I'm late. There was a car accident on the bridge." And he rose before she could finish, pulling out her chair with quiet precision. "No problem," he said. "I'm used to waiting." She hesitated, caught off guard by the way he said it, not impatient, not dismissive, just factual, almost like it meant something else entirely. She sat down, adjusting her napkin, trying to collect herself. "I don't usually look like I've been hit by a storm," she joked, forcing a laugh. He smiled faintly. "You look fine." The waiter appeared, refilled the water glasses, and vanished again. The silence that followed wasn't awkward exactly. It was too intentional for that. He studied her like he was cataloging details he already knew. She took a breath. "So Liam, right, my friend said you're in consulting." He nodded. "Something like that." "That's vague," she said, raising an eyebrow. "It keeps things simple." "For who?" "For both of us, maybe." His lips twitched, and for a second she almost laughed. There was a stillness about him that wasn't arrogance, it was control, like he had spent years mastering the art of saying nothing. "You're not much of a talker, are you?" she said. "I talk when it matters." "And does this matter?" He looked at her directly. It might. The waiter returned to take their orders, breaking the spell. Haley chose pasta and red wine. Liam asked for coffee black. When the waiter left, she tilted her head. "Coffee at dinner. You're either a workaholic or secretly a detective." "Neither," he said. "Just someone who doesn't want to fall asleep yet." "Big day tomorrow, big night tonight." The words lingered longer than they should have. Haley tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to ignore how strange it felt that a stranger's gaze could make her chest tighten. She took a sip of wine, searching for something light to say. "So is this your usual routine? Dinners with exhausted nurses and rain for background music?" His eyes softened, amusement flickering for the first time. "Not exactly. This is new for me. A blind date." A chance he corrected. She smiled. "You're full of cryptic answers, you know that old habit." "You talk like a spy." "You think too much," he countered gently. "It's part of the job," she said. "I deal with people who stop breathing for a living." He studied her face, and something in his eyes changed admiration, maybe, or gratitude. "That sounds hard," he said. "It is," she replied, "but it's what I'm good at." He nodded slowly, as if he already knew that. "You must see a lot of people at their worst." "Sometimes," she said quietly. "But sometimes I see them when they remember what it means to live." He smiled faintly. "You've always been like that." "Always?" she asked, frowning. "We just met." He looked away for a second, his jaw tightening, then said softly, "Not exactly." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer immediately. The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the glass like a heartbeat. The lights from the passing taxis reflected in his eyes. He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table, and the tone of his voice shifted gentler, closer. "You don't remember me, do you?" The words dropped between them like the sound of a match striking. Haley blinked, confused. "Remember you?" He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't explain. He just looked at her with the calm of someone who'd waited years for this moment. For a breathless instant, everything else in the restaurant faded, the chatter, the laughter, the music, till there was only the rain and the weight of his gaze. Her heartbeat faltered, and she felt something familiar stir inside her, a feeling without a name. Whoever this man was, he wasn't a stranger. Not entirely. She just didn't know why yet. The sound of rain still echoed in Liam Cross's mind long after he left the restaurant. He had watched Haley Carter walk away, her confusion written across her face, and he knew she did not remember. Not yet. The city lights blurred as his driver pulled into the underground garage of his building. He stepped out, silence wrapping around him like a second skin. The penthouse stretched wide and glassy, every surface reflecting his success and his solitude. He loosened his tie, crossing the living room, where a single framed photograph rested on the grand piano. It was not a picture of himself, not of his company's launch, or his countless magazine covers. It was an old hospital hallway, captured years ago, the words St. Mary's Clinic etched on the wall. He had found the photograph online one sleepless night, searching for proof that the place had once existed. Night it felt closer than ever. He walked to his study, opened the drawer of his mahogany desk, and pulled out a small metal tin. Inside lay a faded hospital wristband, the plastic worn and cracked, the letters barely visible, but still legible, H. Carter. He turned it over in his hands like something fragile. Memory surged uninvited. He was 17 again, shivering under a flickering streetlight on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The car he had called home sat wrecked in a ditch. Its windshield shattered, its radio still playing a static lullaby. His right arm bled where glass had cut deep, but the pain barely registered. All he felt was exhaustion and hunger. He had been living in that car for weeks after his mother died, after the last eviction notice, after his father vanished with the last $20 they had. He had driven without thinking until the rain and the curve and his own hopelessness swallowed him. The next thing he remembered was waking under harsh fluorescent lights. His arm was bandaged. A young woman was leaning over him, her hair tied back, face pale under the flicker of emergency bulbs. She could not have been older than 19. Her badge had said student nurse. Her eyes were steady, even when his weren't. "Hey," she had said softly, "you're not broken, just lost. That's fixable." He had laughed then, a dry, bitter sound, but her tone had cut through the numbness. She fed him crackers from a vending machine and stayed long after her shift ended. He had fallen asleep to the sound of her humming a quiet tune that reminded him of safety. When he woke again, she was gone, replaced by an empty chair and a folded note under a cup of water. "Get better, keep going, HC." He kept that wristband ever since. It was proof that once in his life, someone had seen him not as a problem, but as a person. Years later, when the first prototype of his health tech device succeeded and investors lined up to buy his ideas, he thought of that girl with the tired eyes and the calm voice. He built Cross Innovations on the principle she had given him help people before they disappear. And now, 10 years later, fate had seated him across from her at a restaurant she never would have chosen if not for her stubborn friend, Haley Carter. The name had been etched into his memory long before the fortune, long before the world decided to pay attention. He poured himself a glass of water and looked out across the skyline. Somewhere below, the city pulsed alive with millions of stories colliding. He wondered how many of them began with one act of kindness. He sank into the couch, exhaustion threading through his body, but sleep did not come. Every detail of the evening replayed itself, the way she had brushed the rain from her hair, the way she had laughed nervously when he ordered coffee instead of wine, the faint tremor in her voice when he said the words she was not ready to hear. She did not remember. He had expected that. People forget moments that save them, Tia, but the saved never forget. He stood again, restless, and crossed the room to the window. The storm had ended, leaving the streets slick and reflective. His reflection stared back at him, older, sharper, distant. He had built walls of glass and steel to keep out the noise, but now the silence felt heavier than ever. His phone buzzed on the counter, an alert from his assistant reminding him of tomorrow's board meeting. He turned it face down. What did any of it matter tonight? He had spent years building an empire on empathy, while forgetting how to use it for himself. He thought of Haley walking home in the rain, unaware that the man she had just met was the boy she once saved. A strange ache settled in his chest, gratitude, regret, maybe both. He poured the water down the sink and stared at the wristband again. The letters glowed faintly under the kitchen light. H. Carter. She had been real all along. Not a hallucination, not a dream. Real breathing, still saving lives. He opened his laptop, searching her name. The hospital staff directory appeared. St. Vincent's Medical Center, Brooklyn. Her picture was there, smiling, tired, alive. He traced the image on the screen with his thumb, half ashamed of how much he wanted to see her again. It was not about owing her anything anymore. It was about connection, about closing the loop between the boy she rescued and the man who had forgotten how to feel. He made a decision quietly, one that required no announcement, no plan. Tomorrow he would visit St. Vincent's, not as a billionaire donor, but as a man looking for the piece of himself that never healed. For now he slipped the wristband into his jacket pocket, the plastic cool against his fingers. Outside, the last of the rain slowed to a drizzle. The city exhaled. Liam turned off the lights, leaving only the view of the skyline, shimmering like a promise. He whispered to the empty room as if she could hear him across the miles. "You said I wasn't broken. You were right. I was just waiting to find the reason to keep going." The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of day when even New York seemed to move slower. Haley Carter stood by the hospital vending machine, sipping bad coffee and rubbing the ache from her temples. The night shift had bled into morning again, and she had not stopped long enough to think about the man from last night. She told herself he was just another date gone strange, another reminder that she was better off alone. But every now and then, his voice came back to her, quiet and unsettling. "You don't remember me, do you?" She shook it off, throwing away her cup. The intercom buzzed, calling her to the lobby. When she arrived, the chief of staff was standing with a small group of suited men and women. In the middle of them was Liam Cross, though she did not know him by that name. He wore a charcoal coat, no tie, the same calm expression from dinner. "Miss Carter," the chief said, smiling, This is Mr. Cross. His foundation is evaluating potential partnerships with St. Vincent's. He wanted to see our emergency unit." Haley blinked, taken off guard. "Of course, welcome." Liam nodded politely. "We meet again." She managed a thin smile. "So your consulting includes hospitals now?" "Something like that," he said. "May I?" He gestured toward the hallway, and she led the group through the maze of corridors that smelled of antiseptic and adrenaline. She explained procedures, triage systems, funding shortages. He asked questions that no donor usually asked, the kind that showed he understood what the nurses faced when supplies ran short and overtime stretched into unpaid hours. When the group moved ahead, he lingered near the doorway, eyes tracing the gurneys and monitors as if they were relics from a past life. "You look like you've been here before," she said lightly. "Maybe I have," he answered. The words made her pause. "You're full of riddles, Mr. Cross. Only when I'm standing in familiar places." He smiled faintly and joined the others before she could respond. Hours later, after the tour ended, Haley sat in the break room, flipping through patient charts when a commotion erupted near the nurse's station. Someone had fainted in the hallway. She rushed out, her instincts already taking over, and stopped short when she saw who it was. Liam lay on the floor, pale, breathing shallowly, surrounded by startled staff. She knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck, pulse weak but steady. "Give me room," she said. They lifted him onto a gurney and wheeled him into the observation bay. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused. "You," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Stay with me." "I'm right here," she said automatically. Attaching the monitor leads. "You're dehydrated, probably low blood sugar. When was your last meal?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on her face. "You saved me again." She froze, staring down at him. "What did you just say?" But he had already slipped back into half-consciousness, lips forming words she could not catch. The memory of his whisper from the night before stirred again, heavy and inexplicable. She adjusted the IV, trying to ignore the tremor in her hands. Later, when his vitals stabilized, she stepped into the hallway, composing herself. The chief of staff approached. "He's insisting he's fine, claims it was exhaustion. The man works too much." Haley nodded. He should rest for a few hours at least. When she returned, Liam was sitting up, jacket draped over his lap, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "You're my patient now," she replied. "It's my job. You said that once before." "What, nothing?" He shifted, grimacing slightly. "Thank you, Haley." She hesitated. "You're welcome, but how do you know my name?" "It was on your badge," he said quickly, though his tone carried something more personal. She studied him for a long moment. "You're a mystery, you know that, maybe. Or maybe you've just forgotten the answer." She laughed softly, trying to disguise the unease curling in her chest. "If this is your version of flirting, it's terrible. I'll work on it." He reached for the cup of water on the tray. His hand shook slightly, and before she could stop herself, she steadied it with her own. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief but electric. He looked at her as if memorizing the moment, and for an instant she felt the world tilt again. "You should eat something," she said, pulling back. "I'll get you soup. You still take care of everyone first," he murmured. She didn't hear the words fully already. Walking toward the cafeteria, unaware of the way his eyes followed her, until she disappeared through the door. When she returned, he was gone. His bed empty, IV removed, neatly discharged papers unsigned. Only a folded note lay on the pillow. "Thanks for saving me. Again." She stared at it, heart pounding the same mixture of curiosity and frustration she felt the night before rushing back. Who was he really? She looked out the window. Rain had stopped, but the streets shimmered with leftover silver light. Somewhere out there, Liam Cross was walking through the city he had built, carrying memories she did not remember giving him. That night, lying awake, Haley replayed every word he had said, every glance that had lingered too long. Something about him pressed against the edges of her memory, a shape she could almost recall but could not name. She thought of his voice saying, "Stay with me," of his eyes when he said, "You saved me again." A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, mixed with confusion. Maybe it was the exhaustion talking. Maybe it was fate knocking softly. Either way, she knew she had not seen the last of him. And somewhere across the city, Liam looked out from his office window, the faded hospital wristband resting on his desk. He whispered to the skyline, "She's still saving me." The following week unfolded in a blur of hospital noise and unanswered questions. Haley threw herself into double shifts, hoping exhaustion would silence the thought of Liam Cross and his cryptic words. But the city had a strange way of drawing certain people back together. On Friday morning, her supervisor approached her with a letter. "You've been invited to a luncheon this weekend," she said. "Private donors meeting the hospital board. It's mandatory for senior staff." Haley sighed, tucking the envelope into her pocket. Saturday arrived gray and windless, the air carrying the scent of early spring rain. The event was held in a renovated hotel ballroom overlooking the river, all glass walls and silver cutlery. She stood near the coffee table, feeling wildly out of place in her simple navy dress among the polished crowd of executives. Then a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Coffee again?" She turned. Liam stood there dressed in a dark suit, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. "You," she breathed. "You left without signing your release papers." "I'm better now," he said lightly. "Thanks to you. You're a difficult patient. You were a good nurse." She laughed softly despite herself. "What are you doing here, apparently consulting?" He smiled, and something in the expression made her chest tighten. "You're one of the donors." "Something like that." The event began speeches, blending into clinking glasses and polite applause. When it ended, Haley found herself alone at a table while others mingled. Liam returned with 2 glasses of water, sitting opposite her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You look tired," he said. "You look everywhere," she replied. He chuckled. Occupational hazard. For a while they talked about the hospital, the funding cuts, the things she wished she could change. He listened carefully, his attention unwavering. Finally he said, "I have a proposal." She raised an eyebrow. "That's sudden." "Not that kind," he said with a faint smile. "I'm starting a new program under my foundation. Health Access Initiative. It funds community care units in small towns and struggling hospitals. I want you to join as an advisor." She blinked. "Me, why?" "Because you understand people," he said simply. "And you don't quit." She hesitated, torn between flattery and suspicion. "You hardly know me. I know enough." There was an honesty in his tone that made her pause. She agreed to think about it. That evening she met him again at the Foundation's office, a modern space overlooking the river. The walls were lined with photographs from charity missions clinics in rural America. Children with new prosthetics doctors in mobile units. He walked her through the plans with quiet conviction. "We'll partner with hospitals like yours," he said. provide equipment training staff support. She studied him, realizing how genuinely he cared. "You talk like someone who's seen the other side of this," she said. "Maybe I have," he answered softly. "Sometimes one person's kindness saves 1,000 others." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something I tell my patients." His expression flickered, a shadow of memory crossing his features. "You did," he murmured before he caught himself. What she asked? Nothing. But his hand had slipped into his pocket fingers, brushing something she could not see. "You're hiding something," she said, half teasing. "Everyone is," he replied. The tension hung between them, quiet but charged. So she said finally, "Trying to ease the weight you'll have to forgive me if I'm skeptical. Billionaires usually like their names on buildings. Maybe I'm trying to change that," he said. "Maybe I'm trying to give back to the person who taught me why." The words startled her. That's a strange thing to say. Strange, he admitted, but true. The meeting ended with a handshake that lingered too long. When she left, the night air felt heavier. She walked along the river, thinking of the way. He looked at her as if he carried a secret he couldn't yet trust her with. The next morning, she decided to visit the Foundation's website, curiosity getting the better of her. The front page showed Liam standing beside the mayor at a charity event. Headlines praising him as a visionary CEO who had risen from nothing. She stared at the screen, realization dawning. He wasn't just a consultant. He was the Liam Cross, the tech billionaire whose company had revolutionized health data systems. She sat back, heart pounding. The man who had shown up at her hospital, who had fainted in her hallway, who had looked at her like she was someone from another life, was one of the most powerful men in the country. The next time they met, she confronted him. "You didn't tell me who you were?" she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I didn't lie," he replied calmly. "You never asked. That's not an excuse. I wanted to know you without the noise. Without what comes with my name. You could have trusted me. I did. That's why I'm here." She shook her head. "You're here because of guilt, or pity, or whatever it is. Rich men feel when they try to make things right." He looked genuinely hurt. "That's not it. Then what is it?" she demanded. "Why do you keep showing up?" He hesitated, searching her face. "Because you did once." The words silenced her. "What are you talking about?" "You don't remember," he said softly. "It's okay. You weren't supposed to." She stared at him, confusion tightening her chest. "Remember what?" He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. 10 years ago. A boy in an emergency clinic outside Columbus. You told him he wasn't broken, just lost." Her breath caught. The memories surfaced in fragments, blood rain, a trembling teenager, whispering he had nowhere to go. "That was you," she said. "Yes." Silence pressed between them. She backed away, shaking her head. "You can't just appear in my life after all this time and make it some poetic full circle. I didn't save you for gratitude." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I had to find you. You're trying to rewrite something that doesn't need rewriting," she said, voice breaking. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," he said. "You did what no one else did." Tears stung her eyes. "You should have stayed gone." She turned and left before he could stop her, the rain starting again, as if the sky had been waiting for this moment. Inside the glass tower of his foundation, Liam stood motionless, watching her vanish into the storm, the reflection of her umbrella blurring against the city lights. He whispered to no one, "You remembered enough." Haley avoided him for days. She told herself it was easy in a city as large as New York. But every headline, every article about Liam Cross seemed to follow her like a shadow she couldn't escape. The hospital buzzed with rumors about his foundation's projects, and when the official memo arrived announcing a partnership between St. Vincent's and the Cross Foundation for rural health outreach, she felt her chest tighten. She almost declined the assignment, but her supervisor's words stopped her. "You're the best liaison we have, Haley. This is about patients, not politics." So she agreed, even as her stomach knotted at the thought of seeing him again. Their first encounter after the confrontation was professional, almost painfully polite. He stood at the end of a long conference table, sleeves rolled up, voice calm, as he briefed the team. When his gaze met hers, she looked away quickly, pretending to jot notes. But later, when everyone else left, he lingered by the window. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "I'm not here for you," she replied without turning. "I'm here for the program." I know, he said, his tone steady but softer. "That's why I wanted you involved." She hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you ever reach out before now?" "I wasn't ready," he said. "I wanted to be someone who could stand in front of you and not remind you of a mistake you once pitied." "I never pitied you," she said sharply. "I cared. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." They fell silent, the weight of unspoken emotions filling the space. The next week, the team traveled to a small town in Ohio to oversee the pilot clinic. It was a quiet place, a few miles from where Liam's old life had fallen apart. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They stayed at a modest motel on the outskirts of town. The electricity flickered constantly, the walls thin enough to hear the distant hum of rain outside. After a long day of patient interviews and logistics, the power went out completely. Haley sat in the dark staring at her laptop screen before closing it. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find Liam holding a flashlight and 2 cups of instant coffee. "Peace offering," he said. "Still trying to fix things?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. "Not tonight," he said, setting the cups down on the small table. "Tonight, I just need company." She raised an eyebrow. "From the woman who told you to stay gone. From the woman who taught me what kindness feels like." She exhaled slowly, sitting across from him. The flashlight cast a soft golden circle between them, flickering against the peeling wallpaper. For a long while, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence. Finally, she said, "Do you ever think about that night?" "The one in the clinic every day," he said. "It's what pushed me forward when I wanted to quit." "I barely remember it," she admitted. "You were just a boy, scared, angry. I didn't know what else to do but sit there." "You didn't just sit there," he said. "You stayed when everyone else walked away. You gave me a reason to believe that one moment could change everything." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't think I mattered that much." "You did," he said quietly. "You still do." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She looked up and saw the same gray eyes she had met across the restaurant table. That night, only now softer, filled with something like peace. "I don't know how to fit you into my life, Liam," she said. "I've spent years building walls just to keep things simple." "Maybe simplicity isn't what we're meant for," he said. "Maybe we're meant for something real, even if it's complicated." The flashlight flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness. She could barely see him, but she could feel him there, close his presence, steady and grounding. "You know what's funny?" she said after a moment. "I used to tell myself I'd never be one of those women who got swept up by someone like you. Like me, powerful, guarded, out of reach. "And yet here we are," he said softly. "Here we are." She echoed her voice barely above a whisper. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but charged. The storm outside intensified thunder, rolling across the horizon. When she reached for her cup, her fingers brushed his. Neither moved away. He looked at her eyes, searching. "I don't want to make things harder for you," he said. "You already have," she replied, her lips trembling with a half-smile. "But maybe that's not entirely bad." They sat there, two silhouettes caught in a fragile peace between past and present. She finally asked what would have happened if I hadn't been there that night. He didn't hesitate. "I wouldn't be here now." She swallowed hard. "That's too much to carry." "Then let me carry it," he said simply. "It's not a debt, it's a promise." The storm began to ease, the rain turning to a soft drizzle. The flashlight dimmed until only their faces remained faintly visible in the glow. "Maybe you should get some rest," she said. "You look exhausted." "You always say that," he murmured, smiling faintly. "Old habits." He stood and hesitated by the door. "Haley, yes, I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm glad fate wasn't done with us." She didn't answer, just nodded, watching him step into the dim hallway. When the door closed, she leaned against it, heart pounding, the echo of his words lingering in the dark. Later, as she lay awake, listening to the rain taper off, she realized something had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was no longer anger. It was the beginning of understanding. Across the hallway, Liam sat awake too, staring at the ceiling, the hospital wristband resting on his palm. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with his past. For the first time since he'd built his empire, he believed something might be worth more than success. Outside, dawn began to rise. Over the small town light, filtering through clouds, soft and fragile like hope rediscovered. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Haley was finishing rounds when one of the interns ran into the break room waving a tablet. "You have to see this," he said breathlessly. On the screen was a glossy photo of Liam, standing before a cross-foundation banner headline blazing across the top, "Billionaire CEO's secret relationship with Brooklyn nurse revealed." Her stomach dropped. The photo was from the luncheon, her face caught mid-laugh beside him. By noon, reporters had gathered outside the hospital gates, their voices clashing with the ambulance sirens. She switched off her phone, but the damage was done. Her supervisor called her into the office. Voice apologetic but firm. "Till this clears up, we have to suspend you. It's not about guilt, it's optics." Haley walked home through the rain, numb. That evening, the news ran a segment calling their connection the Billionaire's redemption romance. They painted her as a charity project, a struggling nurse whose good heart had caught the attention of a man seeking to fix his past. Every headline made her skin crawl. She turned off the TV, sat on her couch, and stared at the window, where raindrops shimmered like small betrayals. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Please don't shut me out. I can explain." She didn't answer. The next morning she found him waiting outside her apartment building, his coat-soaked eyes tired but steady. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling. "The press is everywhere." "I don't care," he said quietly. "I never meant for this to happen." "Then why did it?" she demanded. "You kept secrets. You made me believe this was something simple when it never was." "It was real," he insisted. "You think I wanted the world to find out like this? I would have given everything to keep your name out of it." "You already had everything," she snapped. And I had one thing left, my privacy. Now that's gone too. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Haley, please, I never used you. I was trying to protect what we had before it became another headline. What we had, she echoed, voice breaking. We don't even know what this is. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city moved around them indifferent. Finally, she said, You need to go, Liam. Let this die quietly. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw the tears in her eyes. He nodded once defeated and left. That night, alone in her apartment, Haley scrolled through social media. Photos of her and Liam filled every feed, strangers debating whether her smile looked sincere or strategic. She shut the phone off again, heart aching with something between fury and grief. Across the city, Liam sat in his penthouse, his board members on speakerphone demanding a public statement. You have to control the narrative, one said. People think you're exploiting her. Then let them, Liam said coldly. I'm not feeding this circus. He hung up, staring at the skyline. The city glittered like it was mocking him. For years he had built walls around his life, so no one could use his past against him. Now the very act of honesty had burned everything down. The next day the hospital issued a press release, distancing itself from both of them. Donors threatened to pull funding. His foundation's partners demanded clarity. He made a choice. He called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium. This story isn't what people think, he said. The woman you're all talking about is not my charity, not my project. She is the person who saved my life when I was 17. Everything I've built since then was because she showed me compassion when no one else did. If protecting her reputation haunts me everything I've earned, then so be it. The room fell silent. Reporters shouted questions as he walked away, but he didn't answer. Within hours, stock prices dropped, headlines multiplied, and his board resigned in protest. But for the first time in years, Liam felt free. He donated his remaining shares to the Cross Foundation and disappeared from the city. Weeks passed before Haley heard from him again. She found out through a news article buried deep online. Cross Foundation withdraws corporate donors' rebrands as Carter Free Clinic Initiative. Her name in print made her chest tighten. She packed her bag and took a train to Ohio, following the address listed at the bottom of the press release. When she arrived, the sun was setting behind a small brick building with a new sign out front, Carter Free Clinic. The doors were open and volunteers moved inside, assembling furniture and unpacking supplies. She stepped through the doorway and froze. Liam stood at the far end of the hall, painting the final letter on the wall. He turned at the sound of her voice. You did this, she whispered. He nodded. We did. Why? Because people need a place to heal. Because I needed one too. She walked closer, her footsteps echoing on the tile. You gave up everything. Not everything, he said softly. I kept what mattered. And what's that? The reason I'm still standing. She shook her head, emotion rising like a tide she couldn't stop. You can't just build this and expect forgiveness. I don't, he said. I only hope you see that I meant what I said. You saved me. I'm just trying to live up to that. She looked around the clinic, bright paint, donated beds, charts stacked on tables. It felt alive with purpose. You're impossible, she murmured. So I've been told. She let out a shaky laugh despite herself. What happens now? He looked at her eyes, warm but uncertain. Now we help people who don't believe they matter, the way you helped me. She stood in silence watching him. For the first time since the story broke, she felt calm. Outside, the evening light poured through the windows, bathing the walls in gold. "You still think this makes us even?" she asked. "No," he said. "I think it makes us finally real." She didn't know what that meant yet, but as she looked around the clinic, filled with the hum of new beginnings, she realized maybe it was enough for now. Across town, the last headline about them faded from circulation. The world had moved on. But in that small Ohio town, two lives that had once collided in a moment of kindness were quietly beginning again. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew the truth that had been there all along. Some debts are not meant to be repaid, only lived in gratitude. The following months tested everything Liam and Haley thought they had rebuilt. The clinic in Ohio thrived, but the world they had left behind did not forget. News outlets continued to hunt for stories framing their project as an act of redemption for a fallen billionaire. Investors who had once praised Liam now demanded refunds claiming fraud. Anonymous donors withdrew support, leaving the clinic barely afloat. Haley found herself working 12-hour days again. Only this time, she wasn't saving a hospital. She was trying to save a dream. Liam refused to show how much it hurt him. He spent his nights fixing broken equipment, negotiating with suppliers, and filling paperwork by hand. Every morning he woke before sunrise and brewed coffee for the volunteers, pretending he wasn't falling apart. One evening, Haley found him sitting outside the clinic, head in his hands. "You need sleep," she said, dropping beside him. "So do you," he murmured. "I can rest when this place isn't one rent payment away from shutting down." She watched him quietly. "You can't save everyone, Liam." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can try." There was something raw in his voice that made her heart ache. He wasn't the billionaire anymore, not even close. He was just a man clinging to a promise. That night, as a storm rolled across the valley, a van skidded off the road near the clinic. Haley and Liam rushed out with the emergency kit rain, drenching their clothes as they pulled two children from the wreck. The girl had a broken arm, the boy a deep gash on his leg. They worked together without words, just instinct and trust. By dawn, both kids were safe inside the clinic, sleeping under blankets. Haley looked at Liam, soaked and exhausted. "This is why we do it," she whispered. He nodded, but there was no victory in his eyes, only relief. The story reached the local news, then spread across state lines. Reporters arrived again, smelling redemption and scandal in the same breath. A journalist cornered Haley outside the clinic microphone, thrust toward her face. "Did you risk your life tonight to repair your reputation?" Haley froze. Liam appeared beside her, calm but firm. "She risked her life because that's what decent people do, something you might not understand." The clip went viral within hours. The press called him the fallen hero of philanthropy, twisting his sacrifice into spectacle. The foundation's old board sued him for breach of contract, claiming his actions had ruined their brand. Haley begged him to fight, but he refused. "If fighting means dragging this place into court, I won't do it," he said. "I've lost enough. You'll lose everything," she warned. "Maybe that's the point," he said quietly. "Maybe this is what it costs to start over." Days turned into weeks. The clinic's funding dwindled, and volunteers left one by one. Haley stayed even when her paycheck stopped coming. She couldn't explain why. Maybe because leaving felt like abandoning something bigger than them both. One night she found Liam packing boxes in his office. "You're giving up?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm clearing space." He handed her a folder. Inside was a deed transfer, naming her as the clinic's director. "This belongs to you now." "You can't," she said. "You built this. You made it matter," he said. "I can't run it anymore. The lawsuits will get worse. The best way to protect the clinic is to take my name off it. Liam, this is insane. It's the only way." He looked at her, tired but steady. "You once told me not to rewrite what didn't need rewriting. Maybe now you can finish what I started without me in the way." She felt tears sting her eyes. "You're walking away. I'm setting it free." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hid pain too deep to show. "And maybe someday you'll forgive me for that too." She wanted to stop him, to make him see that the clinic wasn't what needed saving anymore. They were, but words failed her. The next morning he was gone. A letter waited on her desk. "You gave me a life when I didn't have one. I only hope I've done something worthy of that gift. Take care of them. Take care of yourself. L." For weeks she worked without hearing from him. The clinic survived through small community donations and her stubborn refusal to let it die. But at night she would step outside and look at the horizon, half expecting to see his car pull up headlights cutting through the mist. One evening, as she was closing the clinic, a delivery truck stopped by the gate. The driver handed her a single envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping from New York Cross Technologies, acquired by rival firm after founder's disappearance. The photo showed Liam walking away from a courthouse face, unreadable wind catching his coat. She sank into a chair, clutching the paper, realizing he had given up not only his fortune, but the empire he'd built from the ground up. For her. For this. For something better. Days later, a letter arrived addressed to the clinic. Inside was a check from an anonymous donor for $500,000, signed only with 2 initials, LC. Haley laughed through tears. The clinic was safe. She walked outside as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The air smelled like rain and promise. "You did it," she whispered to the empty sky. Somewhere far from Ohio, in a small rented cabin overlooking a quiet lake, Liam watched the sunrise. He had nothing left to his name except peace, and for the first time it was enough. He touched the faded hospital wristband that never left his pocket, whispered her name, and smiled. The world could keep its headlines. He had found his truth. Winter crept slowly over Ohio, frosting the clinic windows each morning as Haley arrived before dawn. Months had passed since Liam's disappearance, yet his presence lingered in every corner, the design of the patient charts, the coffee machine he insisted on fixing himself, the faded blueprint taped to the wall marked Phase 2 expansion. The Carter Free Clinic had survived the storm. Donations from small towns and former patients trickled in enough to keep the doors open. Haley worked harder than ever, her heart anchored to the memory of what they had built together. But every time she saw his handwriting on an old note, or found one of his unfinished sketches, the ache returned. She never told anyone how much she missed him, how many nights she replayed their last conversation in her head. She just kept moving forward as nurses do, stitching the world back together, one wound at a time. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a small card embossed with a single phrase, "Opening ceremony invitation. The New Cross Health Initiative, Downtown Columbus." Beneath it, handwritten, were 3 words, "Come if you can." Haley stood frozen, her pulse quickening. It couldn't be. The date was tomorrow. She barely slept that night, torn between fear and hope. By morning, she packed a small bag, locked the clinic, and drove east through the mist. The city greeted her with sunlight glinting off glass towers. The event was held in a restored train station, now a community health hub. Banners hung from the ceiling. Health care for all, powered by the Carter Cross Foundation. Her breath caught. It was his handwriting on the logo design, the one she had seen him draft months ago. As she stepped inside, people milled around in excitement. Doctors, students, volunteers, all gathering for something larger than themselves. At the center of it all stood Liam Cross, older somehow, calmer, wearing no tie, just a gray sweater under his coat. He was speaking quietly to a group of local reporters, his tone humble. This isn't about one man or one mistake, he was saying. It's about proving that compassion doesn't expire. When his eyes found hers across the crowd, he stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, the noise of the room fell away. Haley felt her throat tighten. He crossed the distance slowly, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You came," he said softly. "You asked," she replied. They stood facing each other, the air thick with words neither dared to say yet. "You did all this," she said finally. "No," he said. "We did. You taught me what it means to start over. You left everything behind, only the things that didn't matter." She studied his face. He looked different, lighter, freer, like the weight he had carried for years had finally lifted. "I heard about the clinic," he said quietly. "You kept it alive. You made it possible," she said. "We're even now." He smiled faintly. "You still don't understand. This was never about debt. It was about gratitude and forgiveness," she asked. "And forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking slightly. The ceremony began, speeches and applause filling the hall, but Haley barely heard them. She was watching him as he stood before the crowd, introducing the Carter Cross Foundation's new mission to fund free clinics across the country, starting with the one in Ohio. When the audience applauded, his eyes found her again, and in that look, everything unspoken passed between them. The years lost the lives, save the promise reborn. After the event, they walked outside into the quiet evening. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement. So she said, folding her arms, "This is your grand redemption arc." He laughed softly. "If it is, it's the quiet kind. I can live with that," she said. "Good," he replied, "because I'm not done asking for your help." "With what? Running it all? The clinics, the foundation, the future. You trust me with that more than anyone." She looked at him, the corners of her mouth lifting. "And if I say no, then I'll ask again tomorrow." "You haven't changed," she teased. "That's not true," he said. "You changed me." She looked down, trying to hide the smile that rose despite herself. "You're impossible, Liam Cross." "So you've said." The night air grew colder, and he slipped off his coat, draping it over her shoulders without a word. For a long moment they stood there, city noise, fading into silence, two silhouettes against the glow of street lamps. "You know," she said finally, "when I saved that boy years ago, I never imagined he'd turn out like this." "Neither did he," Liam murmured. But he never forgot the nurse who made him believe he could be more than his mistakes. Her breath caught again, and she whispered, "You remembered." "Every day," he said. "It was the only thing that kept me moving." They walked along the riverbank until the station lights grew distant. When she slipped her hand into his, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't a grand gesture, no fireworks, no headlines, just quiet acceptance, the kind that healed more deeply than apologies ever could. Later that night, they stood in front of a window overlooking the city. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we build something that lasts. Together, only together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old hospital wristband, the letters faded but still visible. This started everything he said. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." She looked at it, then shook her head. It was never about ownership. It was about what it stood for. "And what's that hope?" she said simply. "And the courage to begin again." He smiled, placing it gently in her hand. "Then it's yours to keep." Outside, the snow began to fall soft and slow. They watched in silence as the city lights reflected off the white flakes, the world feeling new again. In that moment, Haley realized that redemption wasn't a single act. It was 1,000 small choices to love, forgive, and try again. And for the first time since she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Liam slipped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Welcome home," he whispered. "I never left," she replied, leaning into him. The night held its breath, and somewhere far below the river carried their reflections away. Two lives intertwined not by chance, but by the quiet, enduring mercy of kindness. Spring came early that year, and with it, a new rhythm settled over the Carter Cross Foundation. The Ohio clinic, once struggling for survival, had become a model of hope. Volunteers from across the state arrived each week, eager to learn from Haley and Liam, who now worked side by side again, not as benefactor and nurse, but as equals. The media had long since turned its gaze elsewhere, leaving them in peace. For the first time, their work spoke louder than any scandal ever could. Every morning began the same way. Liam brewed the coffee, while Haley reviewed the patient list. He had traded his suits for rolled-up sleeves and sneakers, his office for a shared desk in the clinic's modest back room. She often teased him that he looked more like a handyman than a billionaire. He always replied, "That's the goal." They laughed more, now the heaviness between them, replaced by quiet understanding. Some days they drove to nearby towns, helping local health centers set up mobile clinics. Other days they spent evenings teaching medical students how to listen, truly listen to their patients. One afternoon, while sorting supplies, a little boy tugged on Haley's coat and pointed to Liam across the room. "Is he your husband?" the boy asked innocently. Haley smiled. "No, sweetheart, he's my friend. But he looks at you like my dad looks at my mom," the boy said before running off. Haley felt her cheeks warm. She glanced at Liam, who was pretending not to have heard, though his grin gave him away. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they sat on the clinic steps, sharing a cup of coffee. "That kid's observant," Liam said, breaking the silence. "Kids usually are," she replied. "Maybe he saw something true." She looked at him, her voice soft. Maybe he did. He turned toward her, his gray eyes catching the last light of day. "Haley," he said, his tone more serious now, "I've spent most of my life chasing things that don't matter. Power, success, validation. But being here doing this, it's the first time I feel like I'm building something real." She smiled faintly. "You already built something real. This place, these people, they're proof." "No," he said gently. "You're proof. You're the reason I found my way back." Her heart tightened, but before she could answer, a nurse opened the door to ask for help with a patient, and the moment passed. They stood side by side, slipping easily back into the rhythm of service. Over the following months, the clinic expanded. They opened satellite units in 3 nearby towns, each named after a local nurse or doctor who had dedicated their life to care. Haley insisted her name stay off the plaques, but one morning she arrived to find a new inscription on the main entrance for H. Carter. who reminded us that compassion saves more than medicine ever could. She turned to Liam, eyes glistening. "You did this," she whispered. "We did," he said, "and I'm not sorry." Life began to bloom again in ways neither had expected. On weekends, they hosted community dinners, families gathering under string lights as music drifted across the courtyard. Children ran between tables, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of conversation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. It was home. One evening, as they cleaned up after one of these dinners, Haley found herself watching Liam as he fixed a loose bulb overhead. He looked up and caught her staring. What he asked, smiling. "Just thinking," she said, "about how strange it is that everything fell apart just to fall into place again." "That's usually how it works," he said, stepping down from the ladder. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to see what was worth keeping." She studied him, her voice quiet. "And what was worth keeping for you?" "This," he said, gesturing around the clinic. "And you?" She didn't answer, but the warmth in her eyes said enough. That night, as they locked the doors, she asked him to walk her home. The air was crisp, stars scattered across the sky, like promises waiting to be kept. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked after a while. "The life you had before." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but mostly I miss the version of me who thought he needed it. And now I have something better." She looked at him curiously. "What's that piece?" he said simply. They reached her house, a small cottage, not far from the clinic. She turned to face him at the gate. "You could stay for dinner," she said. "I make a mean grilled cheese." He laughed. "Tempting. It's not a date," she teased. "Good," he said, smiling. "Because I'm terrible at those." "That's debatable," she replied, holding the door open. He followed her inside. The evening unfolded quietly, 2 plates, a bottle of wine, old jazz playing from her phone. When he reached for the dishes later, their hands brushed, and for the first time since everything began, she didn't pull away. They stood there inches apart, the air thick with everything unsaid. "Liam," she whispered, "I don't know what this is or where it's going." "Neither do I," he said softly. "But I know I don't want it to end." "Neither do I," she admitted. He touched her face gently, as if afraid she might disappear. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. And when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or rushed. It was slow, reverent, full of the weight of everything they had endured to reach this moment. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, the world still turning indifferent and beautiful. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled through tears. "You still think you're not broken?" she asked. "No," he said, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "Because you proved I never was." That night, for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of loss. They dreamed of beginnings, and in the quiet that followed, they both knew this was not the end of their story, but the start of something steadier, something rebuilt from grace, gratitude, and the kind of love that grows not from perfection, but from the courage to try again. A year later, the Carter Cross Foundation had become a quiet revolution. What began as one small clinic in Ohio had grown into 12 centers across the Midwest, each one carrying the same inscription on its entrance: "You're not broken, just lost. Come inside." Haley stood outside the original clinic that morning, watching the sunrise turn the fields gold. She had arrived early, as she always did, the air still cool and damp with spring dew. Inside, nurses laughed over coffee, and patients began to line up at the reception window. It had been a long journey, filled with setbacks and miracles, but now the place hummed with life. She still wore her nurse's badge, though her title was now director. Liam teased her about it, constantly saying she refused to act important even when she was. He arrived a few minutes later, carrying a box of files and 2 cups of coffee. "You're supposed to take a day off," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. "You're supposed to follow your own advice," she replied. He grinned. "Touché." They walked through the clinic together, greeting patients, fixing light bulbs, answering questions. No matter how large their work became, they both made sure to start here where it all began. The walls were covered with photographs, volunteers, families, children who had grown stronger. Each picture told a story of resilience, each one a ripple from that first act of kindness 10 years ago. Later that afternoon, a news crew from a local station arrived to film a feature on the Foundation's anniversary. The reporter asked Haley what had inspired her to dedicate her life to this cause. She looked into the camera, smiling gently. "Someone once told me I wasn't broken, just lost. I guess I've been spending my life trying to pass that message on." When the segment aired that evening, it reached thousands, though neither of them stayed up to watch it. They were on the clinic's back porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the night sounds. Fireflies danced over the grass. "Do you ever think about that day?" Liam asked quietly. "Which one, the first one? The blind date?" She laughed softly. "I thought you were the most confusing man I'd ever met." "And now you're still confusing," she teased, "but at least I understand the language." He smiled, tracing lazy circles on her hand. "I never told you why I showed up that night," he said. "I didn't plan it. I was just in New York for meetings. Your name came up in a staff file from St. Vincent's. I thought maybe it couldn't be you, but something made me go. Fate pretending to be dinner," she said. He chuckled. "Exactly." A long silence settled between them, comfortable and deep. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the same one he had once kept hidden in his desk. "Before you panic," he said, opening it. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet. It's a promise." Inside lay a simple gold band, delicate and unadorned. "What kind of promise?" she asked softly. "That I'll never forget what this started from. That I'll keep building with you until we've done everything we can to make the world a little kinder." Her eyes filled and she nodded. "Then I'll promise something too," she said. "That I'll keep reminding you who you are when you start to forget." He smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Deal." The sound of laughter drifted from the clinic windows, and Haley looked back at the glow spilling through the curtains. "Do you realize what we've done?" she asked. "You mean survive?" he said. "More than that. We turned pain into purpose. We gave people a reason to believe again." He looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "You did that." "We did," she corrected, "and we're not done." A soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint scent of lilacs. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried, and a nurse's gentle voice followed. The world kept moving, full of noise and life and love. Liam leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "Still think it was just a blind date?" She smiled through tears. "No, it was the universe sending you back where you belonged." He kissed her, then slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't need witnesses. When they finally pulled apart, the sky had turned a deep violet. Stars began to blink awake above them, scattered like tiny lanterns. "You ever wonder why we met again?" she asked. "Because I needed a doctor," he joked. She laughed, shaking her head. "No, really." He thought for a moment. Maybe because kindness doesn't disappear. It just waits until you're ready to see it again. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then I guess we're proof. Proof of what? That love isn't about rescue. It's about remembering. They sat in silence watching the stars. In the distance, the sign on the clinic door swayed gently in the wind, catching the porch light. "You're not broken, just lost, come inside." The words glowed softly like a heartbeat. Haley closed her eyes and whispered, "Home." A few months later, they launched the Foundation's next project, a traveling medical bus called the Kindness Route, bringing free healthcare to remote towns. They took turns driving trading playlists and stories, laughing over bad motel coffee and roadside diners. Everywhere they went, people recognized them, not as scandal or legend, but as hope made human. And though they never spoke much about their past, they carried it with them quietly, the way one carries a scar that no longer hurts. Years later, long after the press stopped caring and the clinics became part of everyday life, visitors would still find them there. Liam fixing equipment, Haley teaching students, both of them smiling like two people who had already found everything they needed. On the 10th anniversary of the clinic's founding, a crowd gathered under the same string lights where it all began. Liam stood beside Haley, their hands intertwined. He raised a toast to everyone who had ever believed in second chances. "This isn't my story," he said. "It's ours. Every person who's walked through these doors is part of it." The audience cheered, but Haley only looked at him, eyes full of quiet pride. Later, when the celebration ended and the lights dimmed, she whispered, "You kept your promise." He looked at her hand, the gold band glinting under the moonlight. "So did you." And under the Ohio sky, surrounded by laughter and the hum of life, they had rebuilt. The two of them stood together, no longer the nurse and the broken boy, not the billionaire and the woman who saved him, but simply two souls who had learned that love and kindness are never lost, only waiting to be remembered. Do you believe that one small act of kindness can change a life forever? Maybe it sounds too simple, too fragile for a world that moves too fast. But somewhere in the quiet corners of our lives, where pain and hope often meet, a gesture as small as a helping hand can echo for years. Liam and Haley's story wasn't about wealth or fame or even love at first sight. It was about remembering that kindness never really dies. It just waits quietly until the world brings two hearts back together again. Maybe you've been there too, lost in a city that doesn't slow down, walking home under the rain, wondering if anyone sees you at all. Maybe you've given a smile that no one thanked you for, or helped someone who never looked back. But the truth is, kindness has a way of finding its way home. It might take years, it might circle the earth and return to you when you least expect it, but it always returns. Tonight, somewhere out there, a nurse might be saving a stranger who'll someday save her right back. Somewhere, a tired man might stop to help someone on the side of the road, not realizing he's healing something broken in himself too. And maybe, just maybe, someone will walk into a small clinic like the one they built in Ohio. See the sign that reads, "You're not broken, just lost, come inside," and finally believe it's true. That's what this story is really about. Not billionaires or blind dates or destiny, but about how love and kindness circle back when we need them most. We live in a world that often forgets to slow down, that praises strength, but forgets softness, that rewards power, but overlooks compassion. But if you've made it here, if you're still listening, you're proof that the quiet ones still matter. You're proof that hearts can heal, that lost things can be found, and that forgiveness can build something stronger than revenge ever could. So maybe tonight you'll call someone you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe you'll forgive someone who never apologized. Maybe you'll smile at a stranger without expecting anything in return. And maybe without even realizing it, you'll start another story like theirs, one that will ripple through time, waiting for its own ending of grace, because kindness doesn't belong to the rich or the strong. It belongs to those who keep giving even when the world forgets to say thank you. And if this story reminded you of that truth, if it touched your heart, even just a little, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Tell someone that love is still worth believing in. Leave a comment below if you've ever done something kind without knowing it would come back to you, or if you're still waiting for your kindness to find its way home, because it will. It always does. Every story we tell here is a small reminder that love isn't about perfect timing, it's about courage. The courage to show up when no one else does. The courage to give without expecting. The courage to believe that healing is possible even after the worst of storms. Liam found his courage in a hospital hallway. Haley found hers in forgiveness. And maybe you'll find yours tonight in the soft light of your own living room, realizing that you were never really alone. Because the world doesn't need more heroes, it needs more hearts that care. So if this story found you, if it made you feel something, then let it stay with you. Let it change the way you see the next stranger you pass. Let it make you believe once again that kindness still wins. And if you want to keep that feeling alive, stay with us. Subscribe, share, and be part of these stories that remind us who we are. Because love isn't gone, it's just waiting for someone to notice. And maybe tonight that someone is you.